And we have with us a wonderful team of people today who are going to speak to our issues regarding juvenile justice in New York State. As many of you know, and many of you have attended other parts of this week, our Family Empowerment Day has been shifted to a week-long bunch of town halls that focus on specific issues. Today's issue is regarding juvenile justice, and we're very pleased to have with us Commissioner Sheila Poole, who's been a wonderful asset and support, not only to families and young people within this system, but also just attending these town halls and attending our Family Empowerment Day generally. She is always so helpful in showing us that she's, listening to what we have to say. And also we have Senator Jamaal Bailey, who is the chair of codes in the Senate. And that is the committee that works on juvenile justice stuff. When Families Together helped to lead the Raise the Age campaign, we worked with Senator Bailey, we worked with Commissioner Poole, and we worked with the Assembly, Senate, Governor's Office, state agencies to make sure that our family and youth voice was heard as that policy was being shaped. There's still work to be done, of course, and juvenile justice isn't perfect. So we're here today to talk with them about some of the other policy agenda issues that Families Together has on our plate. So I'm going to introduce Commissioner Poole to just say a few words and to welcome the group.
Hi, good morning, Paige. Good morning to everyone who's joined today. Good morning, Senator Bailey. It's good to be sharing the panel with all of you today. I welcome this conversation. I was on a panel invited yesterday, and I said that while COVID has been extraordinarily difficult, one of the things that Zoom has allowed us to do is to connect with folks and hear their voice in ways that right pre-COVID might have been more difficult because of distance and other issues. So I'm Paige, thank you for inviting me here today. Youth justice is something very near and dear to my heart, given that we do a lot of work in this space, along with other state agencies like the Division of Criminal Justice Services and the Office of Court Administration and Mental Health and other partners too. So just very happy to be here having this discussion today.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Senator Bailey.
Paige, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here with Commissioner Poole and everybody here. I just want to make sure before I start, let people know where I get my inspiration from, the great Senator Belmonte Montgomery. Belmonte Montgomery is an inspiration to us all, and anything related to making sure we're fighting for children and families in the state of New York. So I always want to make sure that I begin with lifting her up and saying that I'm attempting to follow in her footsteps as it relates to juvenile justice, as a father, as a son, as someone, as a legislator. I reconcile the three of those things, and I realized that I had opportunities that some of our brothers and sisters in the state simply don't have. I think about today being my dad's birthday and how he shaped certain things for me, and how certain children and families don't have that ability to do that. So it's our role in government to make sure that we're creating and enacting and shaping policies so that every kid in this state, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, sexual orientation, has the same opportunities that I had growing up. And I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to a robust and great discussion. So thank you, Paige, and everybody for inviting me.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Montgomery, many of you know, last year we awarded her with, I think it was Lifetime Achievement Award before she retired. Just a fantastic role model and ally. We've just been so fortunate to have her in our government. So I'm going to turn it over to Brad Hansen, who's our Director of Public Policy, and Brad is going to facilitate the panel. Brad?
Thank you. And before I jump into the panelists, just want to give everyone a brief overview of some of the work that we do in the juvenile justice space. We are, as Paige mentioned, we're huge advocates for the Raise the Age campaign, and there were a lot of things that we feel were left on the negotiating floor that we want to build upon. Raise the Age has been, for the most part, a huge success. We want to build on that. We want to address the lower age of juvenile jurisdiction, so that children as young as 7 years old are no longer prosecuted in the juvenile justice system. We want stronger record sealing. so that young adults who commit crimes, who should have been eligible for youthful offender, could have been, have that option to later in life. And we want to start to see reinvestment of things downstream, young people that are going into detention centers. If those things are to be closed, that money is reinvested back into the communities, into the lives of young people, so that they have the resources they need to succeed. And so that is a major focus of our organization when it comes to youth justice, and you'll see that demonstrated in the panel today. So without any further ado, let's get started with questions. And I'd like to queue up Courtney Lavalle.
Thank you, Brad. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioner Poole and Senator Bailey. My name is Courtney Lavalle, and I'm from the Hudson River region. I'm also the Director of Cross-Systems Engagement for Families Together New York State. I received a felony conviction at 19 for crimes I committed as a youth. During my sentencing, the judge agreed to resentence me and grant me my YO status should I successfully complete drug treatment court and felony probation. Years later, after I did successfully complete both, the judge resentenced me and retroactively granted me my YO status, sealing my felony conviction, which drastically altered the course of my entire life. As a direct result, I was able to then obtain federal security clearance and work with the Department of Defense to help build the first national substance abuse prevention program for the Army National Guard, along with many, many other personal and professional accomplishments. My question is, how can we make my experience a standard outcome for all young adults up to the age of 25 to give them the same chance at a brighter future that I had?
Well, I guess I can begin. Courtney, one, thank you for your story, and thank you for being inspirational for folks, and just to show that a simple mistake does not mean, should not mean. Often it does, unfortunately. It should not. I'm going to be very clear. It should not mean that you're not able to enter the labor market and succeed like you have. I think one of the ways that we can attack this is Bill 1553A, Senator Zelnor Myri's Clean Slate Bill, when we're finally looking at a more expansive actual expungement statute, so that we can expunge and seal these records that are so critical to being able to move forward. If we really want to be about rehabilitation, if we really want to be about actually having people move forward as opposed to simply saying it, we have to be able to have a true record sealing and expungement. So I think that is the best way to move forward in legislatively, in my opinion.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner Poole, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I would just, I would just add, Courtney's an amazing young woman that, raised the age, obviously, right, took us a couple of legislative sessions, right, to sort of get there. And to Senator's point, right, we've seen some really remarkable outcomes in relatively short time in a positive way for young people who otherwise might be in local jails or in the adult prison system. And that was the goal. But as Paige said earlier, there is always more to be done. And, from where I sit and see, there is still more work around really helping and getting folks to really understand the brain science and to understand, right, what we know from science about brain development. And folks still in some corners of our state really have a hard time embracing that. There is still, I think, work to be done in helping folks really understand that this sort of reflexive, punitive approach for young people who are 19 years old is not the way to go, right? It's to understanding that there is a restorative nature, that how can we write off a 19-year-old, right, who's got so much, and I think you're a perfect example, to learn and to become a really productive member. There's work to be done there, and that's through, I think, advocacy, through education, through reaching out to some corners, right, that aren't quite there yet, through your advocacy experts. Because when you talk, Courtney, you and there's others, right, many other young people who still are impacted in those ways. And of course, there's still judicial discretion, on a number of these matters. It does change people's minds when they see you and hear your story. Judges and others, right? On the, on the DA side, and others don't always, by virtue of their jobs, have the opportunity to see people who come out on the other side. And I think, right, by telling your story and your experience, I think it sort of helps reset that story and those narratives.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Senator.
Yeah, and I'll, in my role at policy, as policy director, I'll just mention that we do support the legislation that you were speaking of, Senator Bailey. We also want to go further. There's a bill that we're waiting to be introduced on that would extend what we call the young adult status to age 25, so that those same opportunities that young people under the age of 19 get, if they're eligible for YO, they would get up to age 25 to reflect the brain science that Commissioner Sheila Poole just articulated. So thank you all so very much. Okay, Jeanette Bocanegra is our next ambassador.
Thank you for the invitation, Brad and Paige. Courtney, you're a sense of hope. So thank you for sharing your story. Commissioner, it's fine. I'm finally meeting you. I worked with Gladys Carrion for many years. So thank you for what you're doing. Senator, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanette Bocanegra. I am a mother of a young person that went through the system, which was a horrible experience for a mom. I am a fierce advocate for almost 30 years, working with families in my community. I'm from the city. I'm also the new executive director for Justice for Families. And I'm really glad to see that many of the juvenile facilities are being closed. And still continuing to close. So I'm hoping to see many more besides the 20 plus that have been closed. We've been investing in facilities and tough on crime policies that haven't worked for many, many years. It's been a generation of dysfunction in these facilities. How are we looking to not reinvest? I say we don't invest in our communities. We haven't invested in our communities. How can we move to a more restorative investment in communities that have been mostly impacted by these tough on crime policies that have been impacting mostly communities of colors? So I'm looking to see how the state is going to finally invest in these underlying needs that families, young people, and communities need.
Yeah. Well said, Jeanette, and there's a lot to unpack there. So we'll continue the conversation today. One thing you will learn about me is I'm candid. I am just gonna, tell you sort of the honest deal here, which is that, I think we've made some progress in reinvestment. So for example, there's a funding stream we have now that's called STSJP. It's short, we send it out to local jurisdictions. It's called Supervision and Treatment Services Program. We always seem to make things longer than they need to be, but that's what the name of it is. And what we did a couple of years ago, Jeanette, which is sort of, become a model, is to try and do that. So they get that allocation, but then we've said to counties, because we've also been focused on, in addition to closing state facilities, right? We've been wanting to shut down kids going to detention unnecessarily. So, right, that's pre-adjudication before they get sent to an OCFS facility. So there's been a lot of really positive work in detention reform. And, we passed PINS reform a couple of years ago, persons in need of supervision. That was great. So what we said to counties over the past couple of years is, presumably your detention costs should be going down. And rather than us sweep that money, we're giving you the opportunity to take those detention costs that you would have had and to reinvest them into the STSJP program, which is really community-based diversion and prevention. So that's sort of one example of that concept of how we like to do that. I've been asked questions about, well, you're going to be closing, 4 facilities, right? If it goes through in the enacted budget, right? Why can't all that state savings get reinvested, right? Sort of a right over into, into community-based programs. The answer is, that's a really fair question. I think the reality for our state right now, Jeanette, is given, right, the pressures against our deficit, right, that those state dollars, are needed, right, to fill holes in other places. And I know that's challenging because it seems sort of counterintuitive, right, to reinvestment strategy. But wherever we've had the opportunity, because that sort of policy framework is very much aligned with our thinking. But again, as you know, you've been around doing this work in communities. Sometimes it's a matter of timing and the right time for things, but any opportunity that we have at OCFS to do that, as well as in partnership with other state agencies, right? It's sort of not having everything in a vacuum, but how do we work together better as state agencies on some of these strategies is something else that we've also been trying to do.
And I would add briefly, I think the commissioner she's kind of said it all, right? But I will add that obviously there are budgetary challenges this year, significant deficit based upon a number of situations that we, quite frankly, could have never expected. However, the best investment for juvenile justice is education. That is the best, and it's all about root causes, right? Like we talk about root causes and we talk about justice involvement and intervention. And if we really invest in our young people at the most granular, most basic level, then these problems simply don't take place. And so just to speak about the interrelated nature of how everything works, a couple of years ago, we did a study to study educational trauma in schools. But this wasn't just state ed. OCFS has a role in this in determining what trauma is and how trauma in children in their communities translates to their performance in schools. It translates to the activity in the neighborhood, negative or positive. And we have to make sure we reconcile that everything is interconnected. There are no silos here when it comes to our kids. And so I always say that we have to look at legislation is great, right? But when we're at the point of legislation, that means we're correcting something in the law, right? I don't think kids need to be corrected via the law as much as they need to be nurtured. In the nurturing process actually begins with not just child-sensitive laws, but actual legitimate investment in communities, specifically communities of color. I come from the North Bronx. I've been here my entire life, and I've seen, I've seen some things, unfortunately, right? And I wonder if there had been more investment in the past, would some of those folks have fallen by the wayside? So Jeanette, I would simply say that plus one's everything that the commissioner said, and also that we do everything with an eye towards investing in root causes.
I would just say one more thing, Jeanette. And again, all of you, on the call today have power, and that power is advocacy and your voice. And, that's what Families Together brings to the conversation. And, we're at a new, in Washington's a different day in March of 2021 than it was in March of 2020. And I will tell you, even in these sort of early months of the new administration, we are seeing some renewed interest on a policy level around young people, whether it's young people aging out of foster care or in the criminal justice system. And that sort of federal, right, those pendulums swing, depending on the politics of the moment. But I would respectfully say that now is an important time for these kinds of voices to be lifted up through the federal level as people are taking their new seats in policy, funding leadership positions, right, to be really advocating that there are dollars, again, that their states are given more flexibility in using dollars to do more prevention services, as well as sort of telling these stories, right, about how these federal and state dollars can be used. We never quite get to the prevention conversation and investment in the way that we need to. So I would encourage all of you to lend your voice to the federal level, as well as all of us at the state level.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Senator. This is like a big puzzle, trying to put all the pieces together without seeing the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for my part, and for Families Together part, and many of the advocates that we work with, we absolutely share your understanding that, what happens federally impacts us on the statewide level. But that said, respectfully, we do feel that there is an unprecedented movement and opportunity before us to look at our own state priorities and invest accordingly. And so we're going to continue to fight for that, use that voice that you mentioned, but we appreciate your comments on this. And we know that you are there with us in spirit. So let's move on to the next person. We have Charles Anthony Rice.
Good morning, Commissioner Poole. Good morning, Senator Bailey. Thank you for being here this morning. My name is, as Brad mentioned, Charles Rice. I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, and now I have the privilege of being the Hudson Regional Youth Partner here at Families Together. When I was 11 years old, I was arrested due to a fight with another student during art class where a teacher was injured. But what they didn't know that I was also the victim of early childhood sexual and physical abuse and was struggling with trauma. As a result of this arrest, I spent time in a juvenile detention facility instead of getting the help that I needed. When we arrest and prosecute children, we are punishing the child's symptoms rather than addressing the root issue. And this is still happening as recently as last month in Rochester. That 11-year-old version of me wants to know what the two of you will do to ensure children as young as 7 years old are no longer arrested and prosecuted, but instead are given the services that they need in order to heal from their trauma. Specifically, what will be put in place to address their mental health needs in place of the juvenile justice system.
So I don't know if Senator wanted to jump in. I'm happy to. So Charles, your story is all too familiar. These are right. We see young men like you in my own juvenile facilities. And they don't get help until they are way deep into the system and right, have had sort of multiple iterations of loss and trauma and all of those things. Some of this, right, is as and Senator Bailey's sending a note that his internet's acting up. You heard Senator Bailey, I think, speak earlier about some proposed legislation that's right, sort of circling around the legislative houses now. So I think part of the answer on the age of arrest, is a legislative issue that, I think there is continued interest. I think folks are interested in understanding that we all celebrated raising the age, right? That was the beginning, not everything. And so I think there are a lot of important conversations, and we're also looking around other states, right, who are taking a much more progressive approach in general around youth justice issues. So I'm sure that Senator Bailey wants to say more there. With respect to recognition of trauma and access, to mental health services. I don't know how old you are now, and I'm not asking you, Charles, to share that with everyone, but I do think in the past decade that there has been a tremendous amount of work done around ACEs, right? Where we all know what ACEs is and the understanding of trauma. And I do think that our state education system, I can't speak for every school district, but I think that there is much greater awareness of the impact of trauma and right, what happens if it's not, taken care of. With respect to better access, right, to mental health services, and I don't want to get too far out of my lane. I'm not the commissioner, of mental health here, and I actually think that she's doing a town hall tomorrow. But the one thing that I am very familiar with, Charles, is that there's been a lot of work, and it's taken us, believe it or not, 10 years to effectuate a transition in Medicaid services, the children's mental health services. And so the good news is that our state's children's mental health services, for many families who rely on Medicaid services, we've added 6 new state plan services for those very reasons, to try and recognize that we need crisis intervention, that we need better family-led supports, right? Part of the new state plan also recognizes parent advocacy and peer advocacy. And so I think that we're making progress in getting some better mental health services. And finally, Charles, back to sort of what we learned about COVID, telehealth, right? was a game changer. When we weren't, right, folks needing mental health services, we couldn't go to the front door of the mental health clinic or to clinicians, right? People are doing it now, right, on their computer screens. And I think that has opened up tremendous opportunities for folks feeling less stigmatized about accessing mental health care. A lot of young people, even though they need it, they don't want to say, I'm going to see my right therapist. But doing it remotely, I think, has really been a game changer. And I think we're going to see, I think I hope that we will see some permanent changes that really open up greater access to mental health care and services for young people, because we all know if we don't address those things right early on, that stuff carries and it's not erased, and it creates generations, right, of trauma that we see. So I appreciate you, Charles. And if I can give you any more specific, information about those states' planned services, I'm happy to do so offline.
So thank you for your patience and for your story, Charles. I apologize. The internet went out and it was a little shaky. I got kicked off and came back on, and you wrote in the chat, and I think the commissioner indicated about the bill S4053 about the raise the lower age piece of legislation carried in the assembly by the chair of the Children and Families Committee, Andrew Hevesy. And look, like we've seen it happen in Rochester. This was a bill that again, Senator Montgomery, the great Senator Montgomery, she introduced it previously, and then upon her retirement, she reached out to me and asked me to carry it. And it's incredibly humbling to have been asked to do so, but even more necessary as we look at what took place in Rochester, that with the OC spray that was utilized on the child as well. And when we're looking at the criminalization of young folks, right? I'll talk about the over criminalization of Black and Brown kids, and not just the over criminalization in numbers, but the fact that we are criminalized at younger ages because we appear, sometimes loose quotes, to be older than we look, right? So I'm not sure what your physical appearance was, Charles, but I would venture that maybe the justification was that they probably thought that you were a little bit older at the time, and that they probably thought that you might have been 16 or 17, which still isn't an excuse, but I venture that and those are stories that we've heard time and time again. And the reason why we need to raise the lower age, there are a number of states, and also we do this with the same science that we did raise the age. When we think about the brain formation, we think about the gravity of what people are understanding of what they're doing versus what they're actually doing. There's a disconnect there. And so we also think about legislation that also I'm proud to sponsor with Assembly Member Hevesy about ACEs, about adverse childhood experiences, and how do we reconcile what those are, and how do we move forward from there? Because again, trauma is not just a one-time occurrence, and I think people think of trauma or traumatic experiences as one-offs. Mm-hmm. As a one-time car accident or a one-time incident or a one-time fight. Generational trauma is triggered by simply seeing things happen. Maybe it doesn't even happen to you. Like we moved the bill and the codes agenda this past week, and where the state police needs to, we should have more child-sensitive arrest policies when children are seeing those who are their caretakers be arrested. Again, not commenting on the underlying nature of what the arrest is, but if a child is watching, merely viewing an arrest can also lead to trauma. So those are some of the things that we're trying to look at from all facets, Charles. We are always evolving, and we're always looking for ideas. I don't think that there is one piece of legislation or one policy that will be a silver bullet or a magic bullet, as it were. I think that these things, when we look at them in totality, can work very well together. And I think that we're looking at some legislative fixes that hopefully we should be able to get done soon. And thank you for your question and for your testimony.
Thank you so much to both of you.
Yes, thank you so much, Charles, for speaking out and being willing to share that personal story. It always makes the biggest difference. And thank you, Senator Bailey, for taking on Montgomery's sponsorship of that bill. We're going to continue to fight for it. It's so important, and we don't want another Charles or the young girl in Rochester to ever happen again. And so, you know, we're grateful for the positive forward movement that we're seeing this year. We want to make it happen. Our last question, potentially, that's a good point for me to make to folks that are in the audience. Feel free to start sending us some questions. If you have any questions, send us into the chat to the panel. I'd like to now introduce Daphne Brown.
Hi, all. So I'm Daphne Brown, and while I was residing in Albany in the capital region, my son was arrested at the age of 17. And we just, based on our conversation, we just talked about the overrepresentation of Black and Brown children in the justice system. So what I wanted to know is does New York State have a plan to address this overrepresentation of youth? And also, how are we going to reduce the disparities for families of color so that they can have fair and equitable outcomes if they are involved in the justice system?
Well, Daphne, that's a really multi-layered question, right? And so I would start with saying there is no one policy that this legislature will enact this session or the next session that will be able to overcome that, right? That's just like I want to make sure that we recognize that this is going to be Rome wasn't built in a day and it can't be dismantled in a day, right? And the inequities weren't built up in a year. And in the great work that we've done in the Senate majority under the leadership of Andrea Stewart-Cousins has been remarkable for the state. Let's be very clear. Since we've taken charge in the Senate under Andrea's leadership, we've been able to get things done that we were never able to get done in years and years and years. However, I will say that it's going to take policies like the ones that we've discussed. It's going to take more investment in our youth. It's going to take some of the bills that we have around juvenile interrogation, some that I carry, some that Senator Myrie carries as well, about making sure that we kind of, I don't know, come at the edges of the system and then start bringing it all in. But I think as we mentioned to Jeanette, I think it's going to take legitimate investment in these root causes. It's going to take legitimate investment in trying to make sure we level the playing field. It's going to also, when I think about cradle to careers type of education, right? The only way that we correct systems is to get people in the systems that understand the system, right? So what does that mean, right? That means that I'm an attorney by trade, right? But when I was practicing law, I'd often sometimes be one of the only Black men in the courtroom, right? So what does it mean in a justice system when there aren't people that look like me, that see me, right? What does it mean when we don't have enough judges of color, right? Or judges of LGBTQ, what does that mean, right? Like we have to make sure that when we have diversity across the board, we have people in these positions that understand that there are cultural sensitivity necessary. So it's a long way of saying, Daphne, we are climbing up the mountain. I got to be honest with you. I'm not saying that we need a top yet. I think that we're going to keep climbing, and I'm going to keep pushing because I come from an area where I have to push. I will say that forums like this are incredibly helpful in trying to micro target some of the specific policy focuses that we can do as we go on. But investment, careers, representation is, in my opinion, what it'll take to dig us out of this hole.
Okay.
So I would just say, Daphne, it's good to see you again. I think we were together yesterday in the other town hall. You know, the fact that after 10 years of looking at data and talking about overrepresentation, the fact that after 10 years, the truth is the needle has moved almost not at all. When we look at the number of kids in detention, when we look at the number of young people in other placements, other places of confinement, you know, there's less numbers, but there's still 90+% Black and brown kids. So clearly, whatever we've been sort of talking about and thinking we've been doing has not been successful. And I think that is indicative of some of the things that Senator Bailey referenced, which is these are very complex issues, right? Starting with, I think the reckoning with the extent to which bias is everywhere in every system, and a reckoning with how do we really, right, training is great. We've all been, right, many of us through implicit bias trainings, we've been to forums, we've been to summits. Well, how is it that we're still where we are 10 years later? And that's a very sobering conversation to be having. At this point, I am, and I said this yesterday on the child welfare side, it is about places in the system where there's decision-making power, right? And it's every part of the system. When is a young person pulled over by the police, right? We've got opportunities there. Where do we in the system redact identifying information so that we remove race, zip code, color, and that the decisions are made on the basis of the facts? And we've done this. We have blinded, right, removals in our child protective system in New York State because we piloted this, and guess what we found in the counties that did this? There were remarkable differences when they blinded and removed bias. And I think we have to really own that. And we're continuing that work in child welfare and in youth justice. So for example, this year, we're going to carry over that sort of blinding process, because we know when there are Black and brown kids who are in, let's say, detention, the likelihood of them being adjudicated and sentenced to placement, either in one of my facilities, right, or elsewhere, is far greater than white kids when you look at the sort of same fact pattern. So I've become, and again, it has to be built in all these institutions, right, that sort of collectively contribute to the system for kids and families. So we've been sharing, and again, this is all a journey. We've all got work to do, but I want to let you know, we are diving down deep. Training is great. Action, right, in very different, intentional ways where people have the power to make decisions is really what we're focused on at OCFS. We've also gotten really good at sharing data. So we produce data sets, and it's up on our website very precisely. So there's no mistake. There's no, right, when we're talking to, local leaders at the county level, oh, that's not really an issue here. Yes, it is, because here's your data. And we do it in a very refined, nuanced way, county by county. We also share that data with the senior members of the Office of Court Administration, with whom we have a great partnership. And there's a lot of recognition that there's work to be done there as well. So those are just a couple of examples, but like I said, in my space here, it is really about disrupting patterns of decision-making where bias, right, just slips in, and it continues. So we're also sharing some of our blinding work with other state agencies, right? So, right, kids touch all different parts, and families, all different parts of the system. And so just taking this concept, you could think about other places where if you redacted, right, and removed, how would a fill in the blank decision maker, right, perhaps have a different outcome for young people and for families. And Daphne, just very quickly, finally, to your question about, right, being a mom and a family, right, in this system, right, when your 17-year-old son, was arrested, again, it's that perhaps sense of powerlessness, right, not understanding, right, all these parts and processes and implications of the system. And there are a lot of, right, important conversations about the adequacy and quality of legal representation, access to really good legal representation for young people, and that their families feel, right, that you've got really great counsel, advocating for your son or daughter, in a way as if they were a high-priced, right, private attorney because not everyone can afford that. So I think that my own view is that I think that quality of legal representation is a really important consideration for our young people in the system.
I agree. I was fortunate, but I agree.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. It appears we did have a few more questions. I think they kind of centered around the case in Rochester and people wanting to see more mental health professionals and alternatives to police interacting with our young people. I know that's not necessarily your wheelhouse, Commissioner. That might have been something Senator Bailey would have liked to have commented on, but I just wanted to communicate that on behalf of the folks who sent questions in. Senator Bailey also got dropped with his internet again. That may be a key funding priority that we want to identify this year, better internet for our legislators. And thank you everybody who participated, the incredible ambassadors and the nice audience that we have. Appreciate your engagement this week. Want to reiterate really quickly that we're working very hard to push some of these bills, these proposals that we heard about today, the JD to 12, record ceiling for young adults, and reinvestment into community-based programming for our young people involved or at risk of involvement in the juvenile justice system. So thank you everybody so much. This has been a great.
Brad, if I could just also add that we will send any of the chat questions we can send to the commissioner and to the senator. And hopefully if they have time, they could respond to some of those. So if you're listening and you did put your question into the chat, we'll do our best to follow up on that. And also the commissioner mentioned that we have our behavioral health, mental health and addiction town hall. It's actually at 2:45 this afternoon. And we'll follow up on some of these same questions because they're so interconnected. And as we talk about all the time as family members and as young people, that we are cross systems families. We don't fit into the silos. So that's why so many different town halls with similar topics. Thanks again, Commissioner, for all of your time.
Can I just say one more thing that I think is a sort of a moment opportunity, and not everyone may know this, but the governor has required that every local law enforcement agency submit a plan, right, to really, take a hard look at what happened, across our state with respect to, the issues you all read about. I need to talk about them, but what an opportunity, right, for families like you. So if there are, Paige and Brad know of sort of how those conversations are taking place at the local level, where's this space for some of you with lived experience to be part of those conversations? I see some of the questions in the chat, about social workers accompanying police officers, all kinds of, probably overdue conversations, but get in that conversation too at the local level around some of these opportunities for reform. I think this is a huge moment of opportunity.
Thanks, Commissioner. And we have had some of the STSJP models in the counties have incorporated family peer support as an opportunity to, keep kids out of detention. Senator, thank you. I see you're back.
Yes. So the internet in the house is acting up. So I kept trying, but I didn't want to miss the rest of it. So I am, the view has changed. So I'm on my phone now, and I just wanted to, make sure I hop back on because this is a critical important. And I saw something in the chat about social workers and police, and I think that I forget if it's Senator Parker who has a bill, about like having mental health workers or kind of thinking about how officers approach, approach these situations. And so like those are things that we can fix legislatively, right? Like I think that we have to think about systematic injustice is not something that we can do with one bill. But when we think about, the approach that that our members of law enforcement can take, I think we can change it. Because again, I don't think this is demeaning or disrespectful. Quite the contrary. I have the greatest respect for members of law enforcement because it's an incredibly difficult job. I just think that we all want to be policed with the same dignity and respect that we are to give those members of law enforcement. And I think that sometimes that there's been unfortunately a disconnect in how that has been taking place. And I think that when you can have individuals that can accompany these officers to these interactions, I think it can be better for everybody.
Thanks, Senator. And I wondered, Daphne, if you could just really briefly talk about our conference coming up in May and our panel that we're going to have.
Courtney,
And
I'm going to hand that to you.
Sorry.
Sorry,
Just because I think it's so relevant. I want the commissioner and the senator and anybody who's listening to know about this conference.
Great point. Yes, we invite you, Commissioner Poole and Senator Bailey. We're having Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. If you've seen their documentary on, I believe it was HBO, we're doing a screening that'll be accessible to all attendees. And we're going to have a panel discussion on May 4th with both Ernie and Joe on the intersection of law enforcement and mental health crisis. And we're inviting law enforcement agencies from all across the state, hoping that we'll get a great turnout so we can have a real solid conversation about opportunities here for improvement and growth.
Thanks, Courtney. And we've also invited the mayor from Rochester, who's doing a lot to respond to specifically the 3 incidences that have happened recently there.
Yeah. And Senator, I think that the legislation you were referring to might have been Senator Brooks' legislation. I think it's being referred to as Daniel's Law. And we're in full support of that as well. Just wanted to give you a heads up and appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes, it is. Senator Parker has legislation about mental health providers there. Senator Brooke is new. She's hit the ground running. She's doing amazing things. Also wanted to clarify a couple of things. The earlier bill that I mentioned did not move through code. Senator Liz Krueger via the Finance Committee moved that bill about the child sensitive arrest policies. And the new chair of the Children and Families Committee is a new young senator by the name of Jabari Brisport. Look out for him. He's
yes,
as well.
We had him yesterday in our town hall with Commissioner Poole. And also this afternoon at 2:45, Senator Brooke is on our town hall regarding mental health because she's the new chair of the mental health committee there. So we'll be talking about her bills too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone again. And thanks for all the audience members who are participating and listening and chatting. This has been just an amazing opportunity to have access to lawmakers and commissioners from the different state agencies that impact our families and children. So thanks again to our panelists. Thanks again to the Senator and Commissioner and to Brad for organizing this. Great job. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.